Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for 15 years, and in all that time, through thousands of contestants and countless emotional moments, he had never once walked off stage during active filming. Not when contestants gave shocking answers that left him speechless. Not when families broke down in tears over unexpected losses. Not even when technical difficulties threatened to derail entire episodes. But on this particular Thursday afternoon in November 2024, something was about to happen that would shatter every rule of television production and reveal the man behind the microphone in his most vulnerable moment. The Atlanta studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as two families prepared to compete for the chance at $20,000 and national television glory. The Martinez family from San Antonio, Texas, stood at their podium with nervous excitement. Robert Bobby Martinez, 29 years old, sat positioned at the end of the family lineup in what appeared to be a simple black wheelchair. His wife Maria, 26, stood beside him with one protective hand resting on his shoulder. Their 4-year-old daughter, Isabella, bounced on her toes next to her grandmother, Rosa, who completed the family team along with Bobby's brother, Carlos. Bobby's hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests with white-knuckled intensity, and those observing closely might have noticed the slight tremor in his fingers, not from nerves about the game, but from something much deeper, something that had been eating at him for the past 3 years, ever since that IED explosion outside Kandahar had changed his life forever. During the family introduction, Steve had approached Bobby with his characteristic warmth and genuine interest in getting to know each contestant. "Bobby, my man, tell us a little about yourself," Steve had said, kneeling down to be at eye level with the wheelchair. "I'm a veteran, Mr. Harvey," Bobby had replied, his voice steady but carrying an undertone that suggested there was much more to the story. "Army. Did 3 tours in Afghanistan before I came home." Steve's expression had immediately shifted to one of deep respect. "Thank you for your service, brother. How long you been back?" 3 years now, Bobby had answered, unconsciously adjusting the blanket that covered his legs. "Been working on getting back to normal life, whatever normal looks like now." What Steve didn't know, what no one in the studio knew, was the complete story of why Bobby Martinez was in that wheelchair. They didn't know about the morning of March 15, 2021, when Sergeant Bobby Martinez had been leading a convoy escort mission through a known dangerous area. They didn't know about the massive IED that had detonated directly beneath his Humvee, sending the vehicle airborne and changing his life in an instant. They didn't know about the 18 months of surgeries, the phantom pain that still woke him up screaming some nights, or the prosthetic legs that he kept hidden beneath loose pants and blankets because he couldn't bear to see the pity in people's eyes. Most importantly, they didn't know that Bobby Martinez hadn't really stood up in front of another person in over 2 years. Not even his wife had seen him try to walk with his prosthetics. The shame was too deep, the fear of falling too overwhelming, the reminder of what he'd lost too painful. The game had proceeded normally through the first few rounds. The Martinez family was holding their own against the competing Johnson family from Memphis, and Bobby had contributed solid answers when his turn came. His military training had instilled in him a quick, analytical mind that served him well in the rapid-fire environment of Family Feud. But as they approached the fast money round, something began to shift in Bobby's demeanor. Maria noticed at first the way his breathing had become shallow, the way he kept glancing down at his legs beneath the blanket. She squeezed his shoulder gently, whispering, "You okay, mi amor?" Bobby nodded, but the tightness around his eyes told a different story. The Martinez family had won the right to play fast money, and after a brief family conference, they had chosen Bobby to go second. His brother Carlos went first, managing to score a respectable 128 points, leaving Bobby needing just 72 points to secure the $20,000 prize for his family. As Carlos finished his round and the board was covered, Bobby wheeled himself to the fast money podium. Steve approached with his usual energy, but those who knew him well could see that he was paying particular attention to Bobby, sensing something beneath the surface that the veteran was carrying. "All right, Bobby," Steve said, his voice warm and encouraging. "Your brother got us 128 points, which means you need 72 to win $20,000 for your family. You ready, my man?" Bobby gripped the sides of his wheelchair tighter, his knuckles going white. "Ready as I'll ever be, Mr. Harvey." 20 seconds on the clock, Steve announced to the studio. "Here we go. What does a man do while standing up?" The question hit Bobby like a physical blow. For a moment, time seemed to stop completely. The studio, which had been filled with anticipatory energy just seconds before, fell into an almost supernatural silence. Bobby's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like desperation. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. Steve, sensing something was wrong, stepped closer. "Take your time, Bobby. What does a man do while standing up?" Bobby started, his voice barely a whisper. The question that should have had dozens of simple answers suddenly felt impossible. Bobby's hands began to shake visibly as the full weight of what he could no longer do crashed down on him in front of a studio audience and millions of television viewers. He began again, his voice cracking. I don't do anything standing up anymore." The admission came out as barely more than a whisper, but in the silent studio, every word carried to every corner. Steve froze, his game show host instincts warring with his recognition that something profound and painful was happening in front of him. "Bobby," Steve said gently, setting down his question cards. "What do you mean, son?" Bobby looked up at Steve, and for the first time since the game began, his carefully constructed composure crumbled completely. I can't stand up, Mr. Harvey. I haven't stood up in front of another person in 2 years." The confession hung in the air like a prayer or a curse. The explosion, it took my legs, both of them, above the knee. His voice was getting stronger now, as if saying the words out loud was releasing something that had been trapped inside him. "I got prosthetics, but I can't. Every time I try to stand, I fall. Every time I fall, I remember that day and Bobby couldn't finish the sentence because he had begun to sob. Not the quiet, dignified tears of someone overcome with emotion, but the raw, desperate sobs of a man who had been carrying an impossible burden alone for too long. Steve Harvey, who had built his career on quick wit and perfect timing, who had faced every conceivable situation that television could throw at him, found himself in completely uncharted territory. But what happened next revealed why Steve Harvey wasn't just a television host, but a man who understood that some moments transcend entertainment. "Bobby," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "are you telling me that you've been fighting this battle by yourself?" Bobby nodded, unable to speak through his tears. "Maria doesn't know how hard it is. Isabella thinks Daddy just likes sitting down all the time. I couldn't let them see me." Steve looked around the studio, at the cameras still rolling, at the audience sitting in stunned silence, at the production crew who had stopped their work to witness this moment. Then he made a decision that would define not just this episode, but his entire understanding of what it meant to use a platform responsibly. Steve Harvey threw his question cards to the floor. The cards scattered across the stage with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent studio like thunder. "Cut the music," Steve called out to the production booth, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Cut everything. Stop the clock. Stop the game." The producers in the control room exchanged confused glances, but they followed Steve's instructions. The familiar Family Feud theme music died away, leaving nothing but silence and the sound of Bobby's quiet sobs. Steve walked around the podium and stood directly in front of Bobby's wheelchair. "Bobby, I need you to listen to me," Steve said, his voice stripped of all performance, all entertainment value. "You are not a failure. You are not broken. You are a hero who came home from war carrying wounds that no one can see, fighting battles that no one understands." Bobby looked up at Steve through his tears. "But I can't even stand up, Mr. Harvey. What kind of man can't stand up?" Steve's response would be replayed millions of times across social media, quoted in speeches, and remembered as one of the most powerful moments in television history. "Son, you've been standing up every single day for 3 years. You've been standing up to fear, standing up to pain, standing up to shame. You've been standing up for your family, for your dignity, for your right to be here." Steve paused, looking directly into Bobby's eyes. "Standing up isn't about your legs, Bobby. Standing up is about your heart, your courage, your refuse to give up. And brother, you've been standing taller than most people ever will." Bobby shook his head. "You don't understand, Mr. Harvey. I have prosthetics. I could try to stand, but I'm so scared I'll fall. Every time I've tried at home, alone, I fall. And it hurts so bad, and I remember the explosion, and I just... Bobby, Steve interrupted gently. Would you like to try to stand now, here, with all of us, with your family watching, with people who care about you surrounding you? The question hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation combined. Bobby's eyes widened with terror. I can't. What if I fall? What if everyone sees me fall? Steve knelt down beside Bobby's wheelchair, bringing himself to eye level with the veteran.
Bobby, what if you don't fall? But more importantly, what if you do fall, and we're all here to catch you? What if falling doesn't mean failure? What if it just means you were brave enough to try?
Behind the scenes, something unprecedented was happening. The production team, who normally focused on timing and technical issues, had become completely absorbed in what was unfolding on their stage. Camera operators were wiping tears from their eyes while continuing to film. Producers who had seen thousands of hours of television were witnessing something they had never experienced before. Steve stood up and looked around the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to pause this game. Bobby Martinez is going to try to stand up, and we are going to be here for him no matter what happens. He turned to the competing Johnson family. Johnson family, would you mind joining us over here? I think Bobby could use all the support he can get. Without hesitation, the Johnson family left their podium and walked across the stage to surround Bobby's wheelchair. The studio audience, sensing the gravity of the moment, rose to their feet in silent support. Bobby looked around at all the faces surrounding him, his family, the competing family, Steve Harvey, the audience, all waiting, all believing in him. I'm scared, he whispered. I know you are, Steve replied. But you've been scared before, and you kept going anyway. That's what courage looks like. Maria stepped forward and took her husband's hand. Mi amor, I've been waiting for 3 years to see you stand. Not because I need you to too, but because I know you need to. Little Isabella, who had been watching with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up in her clear, 4-year-old voice. Daddy, if you fall down, I'll help you get back up. That's what we do. Bobby looked at his daughter, this tiny person who had no fear of his prosthetics, no shame about his wheelchair, who just saw her daddy and loved him completely. Something shifted in his expression. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I'll try. Steve positioned himself on one side of Bobby while Carlos moved to the other side. Maria knelt down in front of the wheelchair. The prosthetics are attached, Bobby explained, his voice shaking. I have to trust them to hold me. Bobby, Steve said, before you do this, I want you to know something. Whether you stand for 1 second or 10 minutes, whether you take a step or stay right where you are already victorious. You are already standing in every way that matters. Bobby nodded, took a deep breath, and began the slow process of transferring his weight from the wheelchair to his prosthetic legs. The studio held its breath. His hands gripped the wheelchair arms as he began to push himself upward. Steve and Carlos stood ready to support him, but they let him do the work himself. Inch by inch, Bobby rose from the wheelchair. The prosthetics held. His balance wavered slightly, but he steadied himself. And then, for the first time in 3 years, in front of another human being, Robert Martinez was standing. The studio erupted. The audience cheered and applauded. But there was something different about this applause. It wasn't the usual television audience response. This was the sound of hundreds of people witnessing a miracle of human courage. Bobby stood there, trembling slightly but upright, tears streaming down his face. I'm standing, he whispered, then louder, I'm standing. Steve Harvey, who had maintained his composure through thousands of television moments, completely broke down. He wrapped Bobby in a careful but firm embrace, both men crying openly. You did it, brother, Steve sobbed. You did it. But Bobby wasn't finished. With Steve and Carlos supporting him lightly on either side, Bobby took one careful step forward. Then another. The prosthetics, which had been a source of shame and fear, carried him across the stage. Isabella ran to her father, wrapping her small arms around his legs with pure joy. Daddy, you're so tall, she exclaimed. Maria joined them and the family embraced while Bobby remained standing. "I can't believe I'm standing," Bobby kept repeating. "I can't believe I'm standing." Steve addressed the cameras directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we just witnessed isn't just about one man standing up. It's about the courage to face our fears, the power of support, and the strength that comes from refusing to give up on ourselves." He turned back to Bobby. "How do you feel, my man?" Bobby, still standing with the help of his family's love and Steve's support, looked directly into the camera. I feel like I remember who I used to be, before the explosion, before the fear, before I forgot that falling down doesn't mean staying down." "Bobby," Steve said, "I want to ask you something. What does a man do while standing up?" Bobby smiled through his tears. He shows his daughter that her daddy is still strong. He holds his wife without shame. He looks the world in the eye and says, "I'm still here." The applause was thunderous. Steve wiped his eyes and looked at the audience. This is why we do this show. Not for the money, not for the prizes, but for moments like this, when we remember what it means to be human, to support each other, to believe in the impossible. Bobby carefully lowered himself back into his wheelchair, but everything had changed. The shame was gone. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled him. He had stood up, literally and figuratively, in front of the world. "Bobby," Steve said, "we're going to finish this fast money round, but first, I want you to know that you've already won everything that matters." They completed the round with the studio cheering every answer Bobby gave. The points didn't matter anymore. The money, while wonderful, was secondary to what had already been achieved. The Martinez family won the $20,000, but they had gained something infinitely more valuable. After the camera stopped rolling, Steve spent another hour with Bobby and his family. He learned about Bobby's struggles with PTSD, about the nights when the phantom pain kept him awake, about his dreams of running with Isabella in the park. Steve made phone calls. By the end of that week, Bobby was connected with veteran support groups, advanced prosthetic specialists, and a community of other veterans who understood his journey. But more importantly, Bobby began standing up at home. First for just a few minutes at a time, then longer. Maria would spot him, Isabella would cheer him on, and gradually standing became less about the physical act and more about the emotional victory it represented. The episode aired 6 weeks later as a 1-hour special called Standing Tall: A Veteran's Victory. It became the highest-rated Family Feud episode in the show's history, but more significantly, it sparked a national conversation about veteran support and the invisible wounds of war. The Department of Veterans Affairs reported a 300% increase in calls to their support hotlines following the episode. Prosthetic companies donated equipment to veterans who couldn't afford advanced devices. Most importantly, thousands of veterans reached out to share their own stories, creating a community of support that extended far beyond a single television appearance. Bobby Martinez kept his prosthetics. He learned to walk with confidence, though he still used his wheelchair when fatigue set in or when his phantom pain flared up. The difference was that now the choice was his, made from strength rather than fear. 6 months after the episode aired, Bobby sent Steve a video. In it, he was standing in a park, holding Isabella's hand as they fed ducks by a pond. His message was simple: "Thank you for reminding me that standing up isn't about perfect balance. It's about perfect love." Steve Harvey kept that video on his phone and showed it to contestants who seemed to be struggling with their own battles. He had learned something that day that changed how he approached every show, every contestant, every moment he spent in front of those cameras. Sometimes the most important victories happen not when someone wins a game, but when they win back themselves. The question, "What does a man do while standing up?" became a touchstone for Steve. Whenever he faced his own challenges, his own moments of doubt, he would remember Bobby Martinez and the answer he had given. A man standing up shows his daughter that her daddy is still strong. He holds his wife without shame. He looks the world in the eye and says, "I'm still here." And that, Steve realized, was the most powerful answer of all. The wheelchair remained in the Family Feud studio for months after that episode, not as a prop, but as a reminder. A reminder that strength comes in many forms, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it, and that sometimes the most profound moments happen when we stop playing games and start being human. Bobby Martinez had walked onto that stage carrying the weight of invisible wounds and walked away standing taller than he ever had before. Not because his prosthetics had suddenly become easier to use, but because he had remembered that being a hero isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up again and again until standing becomes not just a physical act, but a declaration of who you choose to be. Steve Harvey had walked off that stage for 30 seconds, overwhelmed by witnessing such raw courage. He had returned not just as a host, but as a man who understood that television at its best isn't entertainment. It's a mirror that reflects our shared humanity back to us, reminding us that we are all fighting battles that others cannot see, all capable of strength we didn't know we possessed, and all deserving of the kind of support that can help us stand when we thought we'd never rise again. The game show continued, but the game had changed forever. It was no longer just about answers and prizes. It was about questions that matter and victories that last long after the camera stopped rolling. And in the end, that was the most valuable prize of all.